Hi, guys. From the title you saw, this note will be about the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. The first thing I would like to talk about is, where does the Charter come from? The Charter is actually part of a greater document called the Constitution. And the Constitution is the supreme law of a nation that outlines government structure and defines and limits government's power. So, on top of all the rights protected in the Charter, the Constitution also outlines how the government of Canada and its provinces and its municipalities is structured. We've had two so far in Canadian history. The first one was the British North America Act, or the BNA Act. I think that's 1867, and it was our first constitution passed in Britain, and generally sets up our basic system of government we know in Canada today. The one that is currently in force is the Constitution Act of 1982. This was a Canadian creation. This is when our Constitution is patriated from Great Britain. The BNA Act was controlled and passed by Great Britain. This is a Canadian act, and it is the supreme current law of Canada, and it includes the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So, what is the Charter? So, the Charter defines and spells out the nature of civil rights in Canada. And civil rights is often a confusing topic with students because it often is connected to human rights. And they are similar, but there is a very distinct difference. Civil rights is more connected with your relationship with the government. So it's more defined than human rights. It's what the government can and can't do to you. So not every type of harm or human rights abuse is covered by the Charter. So all laws in Canada must be consistent with it. Therefore, the Government of Canada and the provincial governments are required to comply with it in order to protect the fundamental rights of Canadians. So the Charter can be used to protect individuals from unfair political and legal decisions. So again, kind of to the above point, all laws have to be consistent with it. And if it can be proven that a law is inconsistent with it, the courts of Canada can strike down or render it what's called ultra vires, any law that violates the Charter. And it's as if someone took a giant red pen to that part of the law and it is no longer enforced. So the general idea here with the Charter is all Canadians must receive equal treatment and protection under the law, regardless of race, ethnic origin, religion, sex, age, disability, and sexual orientation. And there's a bit of an asterisk around sexual orientation because it actually does not appear in the Charter itself, but it does apply. And the last thing on this slide is actually the first thing in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedom, which is the reasonable limits clause. It is something to be considered whenever we evaluate, again, anyone's right to any given subject. Again, it is always subject to a reasonable limit. I like to say you have rights in this country, but you don't have unlimited rights. Speaking of those rights, you have democratic rights, the right to vote as early as you reach the age of 18. We have defined kind of periods in which we have to have elections. That's 5 years. You have fundamental freedoms, which is again, conscience, religious thought and expression, peaceful assembly and association. You have mobility rights to enter, remain, or leave Canada, to move into and earn a living in any province subject to certain limitations, notably to provide for affirmative action programs for socially and economically disadvantaged. So some of the asterisks for mobility rights: not everyone can live in an Indigenous reserve. Legal rights, you have the right to a fair, reasonably prompt trial that is public by an impartial court. By reasonably prompt, we have something called the Jordan decision, which is 18 months. So you have to be brought to trial within 18 months of being charged. And again, no cruel and unusual punishment is also covered by this section of the Charter. Equality rights, No discrimination on the grounds of race, ethnic origin, religion, sexual orientation. This was what I was referring to before. While it does not or is not covered by the charter itself, there are certain cases, in this case, Vrend v. Alberta, in which, again, discrimination based on sexual orientation is prohibited. Also, age, mental or physical disability. And the Official Languages Act. Again, we are officially a bilingual country at the federal level. English and French are obviously our official languages, again, at the federal level, but it's also important to realize we are not bilingual in every single province. And only the province of New Brunswick is officially bilingual. Again, so Ontario is not bilingual. English is our official language of business. And in Quebec, French is the official language of business. And there are also other minority language education rights, which is the right to be educated in your minority language. Typically, this is, again, French minorities and Indigenous people have the right to often be educated by the provincial governments in their chosen language. If you have any questions about the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, make sure to ask them on Google Classroom.